All right, so you know what? Let's get started. People come in as we get going. So I want to thank David, of course, for doing this with us. I need to thank a few of the people, the sponsors that help us throughout the years, which is Epson Printer and Archive Magazine, Photo Shelter, Pro Photo Daily with Jeff Roberts and David Schoenau. Can't do it without them. American Photography. So tonight we have David Hume Kennerly. He's our fifth White House photographer to present. So I'm really thrilled about that. And let me just give you a little introduction about David, where David in 1972, at the age of 24, won the Pulitzer Prize for feature photography. He has covered every presidential election from 1968 to 2020, with the exception of 72, when he was in Vietnam. He took some of the very last photographs of Robert Kennedy at the Ambassador Hotel before Kennedy was assassinated in LA. At the age of 23, he took his first ride on Air Force One, which was during the Nixon administration. He covered the Miracle Mets, winning the World Series in '69. In '71, he was sent to Saigon as a combat photographer for UPI. He was ringside at Madison Square Garden for the epic first fight of Ali Frazier. After Nixon resigned in August of 1974, President Ford selected David to be the chief official White House photographer. And I'm sure David's going to speak more about the President Ford relationship that he has. David photographs First Lady Betty Ford dancing on the cabinet room table. He shot and worked for Time, Life, Newsweek, George Magazine, respectively. David has photographed more than 35 covers for Time and Newsweek. And in fact, one of his cover shots for Time was of the great photographer Ansel Adams, the only time a photographer has graced the cover of the magazine. David has covered stories in more than 130 countries. In 2018, he became presidential scholar at the University of Arizona, a first for the university. David, it is all yours. Thank you for coming, David. Please have to share your screen.
It's nice to see friends show up here. And yeah, I think I'll just show some pictures and then we can have a conversation after that. I don't know if there are any Oregonians here, but I'm a native Oregonian. Took my first published photo was in 1963 in the Roseburg High School newspaper. So
yeah, David, you want to share your screen?
What's that?
We want you to share your screen.
Oh yeah, I can do that.
Okay.
There we go. How's that? Enough about me. Let's look at a picture of me.
Not quite yet, David.
Do you see the screen?
Nope, not yet.
Huh. Hold on. What do we think the problem is? Hang on one second, sorry. Okay, here we go.
Here you go.
Did that do it?
There you go.
There you go.
Okay. All right, have you got it now?
Yes,
Yes, sir.
Perfect, David.
Okay, good. All right. I'm just getting used to this digital shit, man. I don't know what to say. It's like, all right. So looking down from the US Capitol Rotunda, this is a picture Mark Abraham took this, who works at the Senate Press Photographers Gallery. And this was my view of Gerald Ford's casket. And it's one of the great angles of all time. And obviously, this is not the first time somebody thought of it. I think first time I saw this picture, which is essentially the same shot, different casket, was I saw a Life magazine picture of Eisenhower's funeral. And so that would have been 1969, I believe he died. So I got right up there. And this is the Ansel Adams cover you were talking about.
Yep.
And Ansel said, as well as being a photographer and environmentalist, is a great philosopher, really. He said, you don't make a photograph just with a camera. You bring to the act of photography all the pictures you've seen, the books you've read, the music you've heard, and the people you've loved. So in other words, photography is an experience, and you see things related to what you know, and we all see things differently. Just to prove back, this is my first ever press card. This is in my archive at the University of Arizona Center for Creative Photography. And I've had all my work, life's work, has been there for almost 2 years now. But Ansel Adams started the CCP in 1975. And in fact, he invited me to give my pictures to them back in '79. I still have the letter from the president of the university. And I said, I've only been out of high school like 10 years or something. I said, I can't do that. And it just didn't seem right. But finally, after all these years, we made this deal to have my pictures over there. And what's great about it is I could share. It's about the history. It's about interdisciplinary work between all these different classes. I have a really good relationship with the deans there. So it's not just a bunch of pictures. These are pictures with stories, obviously. This is an early selfie from 1965 in a mirror using an old Rolly, which I started with a 4x5 crown graphic, same as a speed graphic. And I think what I learned from that, and particularly from the old news photographers, is that is discipline. Just because you shoot 1,000 pictures doesn't mean you're going to get a good one. And if you look at some of the great photographs of all time, Joe Rosenthal's Iwo Jima flag raising, that was a 4x5 picture, one frame, that's it. Because by the time you flip that holder over, the moment is gone. Robert Kennedy at the Portland Labor Hall in 1966. This is my first major league assignment. I was a young photographer on the Oregon Journal. And I was told by the editor that I better get a good shot or else. And when I got to the Labor Hall, the place was so crowded, I couldn't figure out how to get in there. And I could see my young photographer's life flashing before my eyes. And I saw this photographer standing on the periphery of the room. And he looked like, I didn't know who he was. And it appeared he was traveling around with Robert Kennedy. So I went over and I introduced myself to him. And it was Bill Epridge of Life magazine, who was in fact traveling with Kennedy. And I think he sensed my panic because I asked him, I said, how do you get through these crowds? I mean, I can't get into the room. He kind of looks at me and says, okay, hang on to my coat, kid. And he just sliced through there. And not only that, but he got me up on the stage off to one side. He said, this is where your picture is going to be. And this is the photo. I mean, it did a lot of things, but it probably saved my career. And then later that night, I went out to the Portland airport, and Kennedy was in the crowd shaking hands and got up, went into the plane. And then Epridge climbed the steps. He looked back at me and saw me down there and kind of gave me a wink and a thumbs up and went into the cabin of the plane, and the door closed and taxied out. And that was really a profound moment in my life because I wanted to be on that airplane. I wanted to run away and join the political circus. I wanted to see what Robert Kennedy,
That's
where
Kennerly.
he was going, and to see people like him who made decisions and all that. That really molded who I have become in my life as a political photographer. Flash forward 2 years later, I was at the Ambassador Hotel here in LA. This is the last picture of Robert Kennedy alive. He went into the kitchen right behind, and I was not with him. Ron Bennett, fellow UPI photographer, was with him when he was shot. Bill Epridge was in there. Bill made one of the great photos of all time. And Bill and I later became friends, and I was able to tell him how much he meant to me and what he did to help my career. And but Bill was very close to Robert Kennedy and was torn apart by this assassination, but he kept shooting. And I later asked him, how are you able to do that? He said, we're pros. This is what we do, as hard as it is. And I never forgot that. This is one of my pictures of Ethel Kennedy outside of the Ambassador. I never saw Robert Kennedy again, but I took this picture of her through the ambulance door. Very difficult to take pictures like this emotionally, because I had gotten to know Kennedy a little bit, not like Bill, but again, you do carry on as a news photographer, particularly. And Frank had mentioned my assignment to photograph the Ali Frazier fight. This is 50 years ago now. It was August 8th, March 8th of 71 at the Garden. And I was given this assignment to photograph Ali Frazier, and it was called The Fight of the Century. It was, these are two undefeated world champions because of Ali having not wanting to do the draft, I guess would be one way to put it. He was not allowed to fight. So Frazier became the world champion. So this is the first time these guys met, and it was an incredible evening. And I was like 23 years old. I was on my way to Vietnam. This is going to be the last assignment I covered before I shipped out to Saigon. And they probably gave me the assignment because they thought I was never going to come back. And it was sort of like, they could always feel good about this. But I was a good sports photographer also. And I will show you, this is the fight. And I want to show you how fast the knockdown came in the 15th round. And I was over on the left there. I'm not sure if I was in there, but you saw how fast that happened. This was my frame. And this picture ended up on the front of the New York Times the next day. March 9th, 1971. It was a big day for me, not only because of this, it was also my 24th birthday. And I was staying at Dirk Halstead's place in New York, a fellow UPI photographer. And when this happened, it was huge. I mean, the New York Times had a bunch of photographers there, and I was there. And you can see the only other person that had that moment was Elliot Erwitt. And I'm in the picture. You see the four photographers down the front. I'm the third over from the left. That's Ken Regan on the far right, Danny Farrell of the New York Daily News over on the left. I can't remember the other ones, but across the way is Larry Morris, right behind Frazier of New York Times, Andy Lopez of UPI. Frank Sinatra was here at ringside. And it was incredible. And I just got this picture recently. Elliot sent me a signed photo of it, and I have the two together, but everybody else missed the picture of the knockdown. And that photograph became one of my Pulitzer Prize photos. The Pulitzer I won in 72 was for the work I did in 71, which included Vietnam and Cambodia. I think I have some later. I also scored with this one, front page of the New York Daily News, a different frame. And that was a big deal. And then I went to Vietnam. This is how I went out and covered assignments in the field. I was in Vietnam for about 2 years, first for UPI and then Life magazine before they folded, and then Time. And this is how I earned my $120 a week as a UPI photographer. These were some of the photos from the Pulitzer portfolio. There were 11 in all. And if you want to know the value of great editors, and any of you who are photographers and have been lucky to work with great editors, know that they can make or break your career. In this case, they made my career. Larry DeSantis, who was the head photo editor in New York, and I'd worked there for a year, and he was really tough on me and other photographers. Now we have these departments called HR departments. I'm sure some of you are familiar with them, but HR would not have appreciated the way I was talked to and had pictures thrown at by Larry DeSantis. But over the course of the year of 71, every time Larry saw a picture of mine that he liked, he threw a print in his drawer. And at the end of the year, or early the next year, he entered 11 of my pictures in the Pulitzer contest. And that's how I won. And I didn't know I'd been entered. The first I knew was I got a telegram in Saigon where I was working. And I thought it was some kind of a joke. And it was no joke. This was the centerpiece photo. It was a lone soldier coming over the hill. I'm on an opposite hill. As you can see, it's blown away. There's a Viet Cong bunker on the left. This is like wildly dangerous area with landmines, and it was up above the Ashaw Valley outside of Way. And this is a good example of waiting for a picture. I saw this guy coming up a hillside, and I still recall this. I mean, I certainly had no idea it would be part of a Pulitzer Prize. I didn't think about stuff like that. But I prayed to God that he would come into this clearing between these framed by these trees. And so I got set up. I remember I had a 200 millimeter lens on my Nikon F, and he came through, and I got the shot. Wait for it is a good, patience is an important factor in this business. Under fire, this is in Cambodia, Vietnamese hauling one of their comrades off the battlefield. And what you don't hear is the sound, you don't smell the smells. This is a really ferocious moment, but the objective obviously is to get the picture. And one of my favorite pictures from the Pulitzer portfolio and in a war was this picture of these young buffalo, water buffalo drivers, I guess you'd call them, the kids. Their job is taking care of these buffalo. And it was a firefight happening maybe 100 yards away. But what I like about it, because I have a very optimistic point of view, which is hard to believe after all these years and after all the shit I've seen, but this is reflective of so much of what I've covered, really, is that people get along despite all the horrible things that are going on. And the kids are a perfect example of that. I was in Hanoi for the release of the final POWs. I was with Time Magazine. These are American prisoners of war. It was in a camp called Plantation. This is not the Hanoi Hilton. Some of them had been there. John McCain had been in the Hanoi Hilton, which was an old French jail downtown Hanoi. And you can't believe, and I visited that place, what he had to go through for over 5 years of being tortured. He was injured when he bailed out of his plane in Hanoi after it was shot down. And I guess, and I'm not normally a political person, but when the former president, before he became the former president, was campaigning and talked about McCain and saying he liked people that hadn't been captured, it was really one of the most disgusting comments I've ever heard anybody make, and he's made plenty of them. So it's a tight race there. But if you know McCain, whom I knew really well, and I had a good relationship with him. He's a really cranky guy, but I covered his campaign, and 2000 and 2008, I guess it was. He was a hero, but not because he got shot down. He was a hero, and that's a word I don't throw around much. I know it gets used way too much, like they're heroes for blah, 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 which is, it's a point of view, certainly. But he refused to be led out of there ahead of the other people who had been people who were shot down and had been POWs longer than him. There weren't many, but there were a few. And because his dad had been an admiral and his grandfather had been an admiral, they were going to make an example, and he refused to be released from that from the Hanoi Hilton. And I'm sure it wasn't because he wouldn't have loved doing it, but that was heroic. I mean, considering how he was being tortured and all that. Meanwhile, Donald J. Trump is riding around New York in his daddy's limo, bragging about how he didn't get VD. So that's his contribution to the war effort. I am deeply, deeply disturbed by all of that and subsequent events. But these guys were released the same day, later on in that day. And I was there to see it. And this is one of my very first iPhone pictures. It's one I made at the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C. This is a sacred place for me. 4 of my high school classmates were killed in Vietnam. We had a pretty small class in this Oregon school I graduated from in 1965. And every time I go there, I look for their names and the others. And if for any of you who've never been there, this is an experience that drives home the enormity of what happened in the Vietnam War, like 58,000 dead soldiers and other people who were in the war. And not to mention hundreds of thousands of others who've had post-traumatic stress problems and were wounded. Mccain was one of them. I've known so many. And when I go there, I cry, thinking about how awful that this was. I mean, it was a bad, not that there are any good wars, but it was a scandal, this war. And part of the reason I went over was I want, as a journalist, certainly, I mean, I was a news photographer. I think I never would have forgiven myself if I hadn't gone. It was the story of my generation's war, really. And I wanted to see what it was that had been killing not only my classmates, but all these other people. And it wasn't just checking off a box. I mean, I didn't care about that kind of stuff. I'm not in the military, but I felt an obligation to do it. And I went kind of late in the war, 71. Eddie Adams, whom I knew pretty well at that point, said, well, I don't know why you're going. All the good pictures have already been taken. Any of you who know Eddie will know, won't find that to be a shocking statement. And after I won the Pulitzer, and I still have this, I got a telegram from him congratulating me and saying, now I know why you went over there. And the only time I ever photographed LBJ was here. And it was 1970, he was out of office. He was going to the dedication of a portrait of Harry Truman at the National Portrait Gallery. And Truman was the president when I was born, so there's a certain amount of irony in this photo. But I photographed every president from LBJ through Joe Biden, certainly. And Richard Nixon was my main assignment once I got back from Vietnam. I spent over 2 years, starting with UPI, then Life, then Time. But I could see that the story was shifting to Watergate and all that, and chose to come home. And Time brought me back to work for them in DC. Richard Nixon was under strain for Watergate, and this is a great moment in at the opening of the new Grand Ole Opry, and he was playing Happy Birthday to his wife, Pat, who was there. And this is a early picture of Hillary Rodham at the time in the hearings to impeach Richard Nixon. And she was standing next to John Doerr on the left, who was the attorney, was the chief counsel for the Watergate committee, the Judiciary Committee, with Peter Rodino as chairman. And she was working with him. Hillary and I are the same age. I'm sure I was trying to crop her out of this photo somehow. I had no idea who she was. When this picture never surfaced till after her husband, Bill Clinton, was impeached, actually was impeached in that same room. And I went back through all my stuff and found this photo. It's a good reason never to throw any of your stuff away, that's for sure. Richard Nixon waiting to come into an event in the East Room, and I kind of leaned out from the press area to take this picture. It's symbolic in a lot of ways. He was, I think, in many respects, a lonely guy and mistrustful of people. Henry Kissinger told me that this was a picture that very much captured like his personality. And then Spiro Agnew resigned, the Vice President of the United States. This is the day after Agnew resigned. I'd been covering him for Time, and got this shot of him. And of course, Washington is a place where, oh yeah, Agnew resigned. Immediately, the stories are about, okay, who's going to replace him? If somebody dies or resigns or is fired or whatever, it's like, see you later, who's next? And so I was sent up to the Capitol to take a picture of Gerald Ford, who was one of the people on the list, we thought. And I got in to see him immediately. He was the minority leader of the House. Since he'd been in Congress from 1948 after World War II. In fact, his office was right across from Congressman John F. Kennedy's office. They were friends. They had served together in the Navy and the Pacific, and both had behaved heroically, I think. And it wasn't like now where people call each other names and everything, but Ford let me into his office. I took a picture of him, which I called the Rembrandt lighting situation, is by a window. And he said, "You're wasting your time. There's no way Nixon's going to pick me." And he didn't know at that point. And this is the picture I took. This appeared the next week on the cover of Time magazine, and I shot it. And that night, Nixon announced Ford as his pick. And this is my first Time cover, and it was Gerald Ford's first Time cover. And then Time assigned me to follow him around full time, which is unheard of. In fact, no other agency or magazine, even though there was suspicion that Nixon might go, but at that point it was by no means clear. But John Derniak, who was the picture editor of Time magazine, said, "Kennerly, I want you, Ford is your assignment. And everywhere he goes, I want you to go." And that's how I got to know the Fords, and particularly Vice President Ford. It was really one of the great relationships I've had in my life with him and the family. Even though I was only 2 years older than his oldest son, Mike, he respected what I'd done in Vietnam. He thought I was funny on occasion, not all the time, but he liked having me around. But he was like, it was a terrific subject photographer relationship. And this picture of Nixon was in the Oval Office. It was in, I believe, May or June. I can't remember the exact date, but it was a photo op in the Oval Office. Come in, shoot for a minute, and you go out. And when I saw Nixon, whom I had not been covering regularly, I thought he looked horrible. I thought that I couldn't believe how bad he looks. I did a few close-ups of him. This picture ran in Time magazine the following week, and it would raise questions about his mental state and all that. They personally attacked me. It's a lot of what you would see now, not from Biden, but from the former guy, of like, he would have called that fake news or whatever. But the fact is, this is what I saw. The picture was not taken out of context. If you looked at the context sheet, this was actually one that was a little better. And then it turned out later, after Ford, got into office, that I got to know Al Haig. Haig said that I was the only person to really capture what Nixon really was looking like at the time. I said, well, Al, why don't you speak up about that? Yeah, right. I wanted you to hear this because hopefully you have your sound up. I found this in the Nixon archive. This is Richard Nixon announcing he's going to resign, or right before he goes on live camera. And he's talking to Ollie Atkins, who's his White House photographer. And Ollie was the second personal photographer, official civilian photographer to have the job. First was Yoichi Okamoto as a civilian. Oki was LBJ's photographer and is to this day the gold standard of presidential photography. No one's done better than he has. I think all my colleagues, Susan would agree with this, Bob McNeely, everybody, that he had a great subject, but he was the first one to be given that kind of access. Cecil Stoughton had worked as a military photographer for JFK, but he wasn't the official White House photographer. And he had very little access, but Oki had incredible access. He was the first photographer really to take you into the inner sanctum. Like he was there when Martin Luther King met with LBJ, and he was there when LBJ was dealing with the bombing halt and with the assassination of Martin Luther King. And the pictures are astonishing. They're astonishing. They are, and I was, one of the things I do is I produce documentaries, and I produced a documentary that the No Day brothers did, who did the two French guys who did the 9/11 extraordinary doc, and this is on White House Chief of Staff. And part of my job as producer was to go to the presidential library and look at other photographers' work. And so I went to, and I knew Oki's work, and I knew Oki, and I went, but I'd never seen his contact sheets. And to me, it was so emotional for me. It was like reading original Mozart scores penned by the great composer himself. That's how I felt looking at Oki's pictures. Every page, in fact, every contact sheet or stories that he did in the White House had a beginning and a middle and an end. They were phenomenal. I can't even tell you how good he was. You have to look at his pictures. There's never been a book of his work, which is something I've contemplated. But this is Nixon talking to Ollie Atkins, his White House photographer, whom had been with him for 2 years and in the campaigns and all that. He's talking to Ollie, who wants to take pictures. Nixon's about ready to go live to say that he's resigning the presidency. So obviously he's pretty uptight. And this is what I found in the Nixon archive, this clip.
Ollie, only the CBS crew now is to be in this room during this. Only the crew. No, there will be no picture. No, after the broadcast. You've taken your picture. Did you take one just now? That's it. Because we don't want it. We didn't let the press take one, so you've taken it. Just take it right now. This is right after the broadcast. You got it? Come on.
Well, this is the next day, but to go back to that video, that's an astonishing, disturbing video. He's talking to the guy who was his White House photographer. And what I knew at that time was that Ollie didn't really have access. He would come into certain meetings that he was allowed to go into, take a couple shots and then go out. And he did, and Ollie was a good photographer. That wasn't the point. The point is he had no access. And part of my research on White House chiefs of staff was I wanted to see the pictures of Haldeman and Haig and look through Ollie's work. And it was a photographic disaster zone to me. It was, there were no pictures of meeting with generals prior to declaring a ceasefire in Vietnam in 1973. There was nothing, certainly nothing about Watergate. And after looking at Oki's pictures, and Ollie was the second chief White House photographer, it just was, just hammered home what I knew or suspected and all that. And so the next day, I'm out there for Time Magazine, photographing Nixon leave. He's the first and only president who's ever resigned from office. And these are pictures I took as he got on the helicopter and made this wave. And this whole sequence only lasted like 10 seconds or something, but the pictures people remember really, I'll go back for 1 second. I don't have it, but the sequence was, he does this wave. He's right in front of the White House. If he looks up, it's the south lawn of the White House. So he's seen the White House for the last time as president of the United States. And the picture before it, this moment, has grown on me because he's looking up at the White House for this brief second, and then he waves a little quick snappy wave. If you see the film, it's sort of like the Ali Frazier fight when this happens. But then the crowd out on the south lawn of people who were there to see him off, they were staff and other people, and they're applauding and cheering. And so then he did the double V sign before he ducked into the helicopter. Excuse me, sorry. But that wasn't the story. This was the story. The smiling Richard Nixon was dead inside. I can only imagine what that would have felt like, resigning in disgrace. And then 2 hours later, Gerald Ford is sworn in as president of the United States. And that night, and by this time I was really close with the Ford family and the president and Mrs. Ford and the kids, but particularly Mrs. Ford and President Ford. And I suspected he was going to ask me to become his White House photographer. It had never been discussed. He didn't discuss what people might do in a Ford administration because he didn't want to look like he was forcing Ford out. And I mean, I know you've heard stories about what a decent person he is. That's all true, 100% true. And it wasn't political connivance. He wasn't trying to push the guy out, didn't want to appear to be doing it, wasn't doing it. But that, the day I was doing this, I was asked by one of Ford's staffers to go to their house in Alexandria that night. The Fords didn't move into the White House for another 10 days. The transition was so abrupt. And they had a very modest split level house over in Alexandria, Virginia. And they were having a get together. I wouldn't call it a celebration, but it was a family and very close friends on the night he became president. And they invited me to come over to take pictures. And I was with Time Magazine. I would consider that a pretty good scoop. And at some point during the night, President Ford said, "I'd like you to stick around after everybody's gone." At that point, I knew he was going to ask me to become his chief White House photographer. And I honestly was not sure I wanted to do it. I thought about it. I was 27 years old. This would be a big deal, certainly. But I had a good spot at Time Magazine. I was one of their top photographers, traveling around the world doing stuff, doing what I wanted to do. And I just felt that if Ford, if it was going to be the same circumstances as Ford, there's just no way I was going to do it. And I don't mean this, I mean, I'm being 100% honest about it, because I thought about it, even though I didn't know for sure he'd ask me, but so we're sitting on the couch in his living room, and this real small living room. I'd been in there, taking pictures of the family, but it's just me and the president. He's smoking his pipe, and I'm thinking, Jesus Christ, this guy's only been president of the United States for like 9 hours. I mean, here's this kid from a lumber town in Oregon with no political connections, sitting with the president of the United States, even though I knew him well at that point. But I said, shouldn't Kissinger be here? Or like, I don't know, but he wanted to have this conversation, and he asked me to be his personal photographer. And I just looked him in the eye. I said, Mr. President, this is a weird thing to say, in my mind at that moment, but I said, I would love to do it. And I gave some brief background on Ollie not having access, and he knew Ollie. And I said, I just can't do that. I said, but I would love to do the job if I report directly to you and I have complete access to everything going on in the White House. And he just stopped smoking his pipe. And I thought, and I couldn't believe I said that, really. And I then was thinking, okay, I'm going to have to call my parents and tell them that the president offered me this job, and I essentially told him to shove it. And he started laughing, and he said, you don't want Air Force One on the weekends? And at that point, I knew it was going to work out. And it did work out. And he was good for it. For the whole time I was there, I was in every meeting that I wanted to be in, and which was most of them top secret meetings, personally difficult meetings. I was there. And he understood why I wanted to be in there. And unlike LBJ, who I think gave Oki that tremendous access for mainly, if not mainly, but Oki told me this, that it was out of his vanity and to be to get recorded for history. But the Forgers were happy to have me there doing what I did, and that was it. And right off the bat, I'm in the Oval Office. He's got his foot up on the desk. You see the empty shelves in the background. All the Nixon stuff has been taken out, and the Ford stuff is yet to be put on the shelves. But there I am. I'm right in the Oval Office, just me and him. And this is the way it was. And this picture taken by Bill Fitzpatrick really represents my relationship with him. Terry O'Donnell on the left was the doorkeeper, and the three guys in the background are Secret Services, the White House colonnade. This really is a good example of my relationship with President Ford. And then I'm in everything, and the chief of staff for Ford was Donald Rumsfeld. Next to him there, the guy putting the cigarette out on the ashtray on the president's desk is Dick Cheney. And Alan Greenspan on the right, and I showed him this picture years later, and I'm looking for input. I had a book called Extraordinary Circumstances where I the Ford photo essay. And so I got comments from all these different people. And Greenspan said, as usual, I had no idea what was going on. And that certainly looks that way. And I was there when Ford pulled the plug on the Vietnam War under a picture of Teddy Roosevelt in the Roosevelt room. And this is a top secret meeting. He's really, there were steps as the war went, the evacuation proceeded. I should say, ordering the evacuation of Saigon. This is one of the key decisions. As you can see, nobody's saying anything. I mean, here's the head of the CIA and Kissinger, Secretary of State, Defense, the Vice President, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and me. And this was a very important moment. And it was personally important because I had been in the war. African American sworn in as a cabinet officer, Bill Coleman, by Thurgood Marshall. Both these guys are great civil rights leaders. And I just love this. This is what I lived for, was the behind the scenes stuff, and I got it. At the very end of this is a picture they wanted to take of all of them behind the desk. This is right after he conceded the election to Jimmy Carter, and Mrs. Ford giving a chin up move, son Jack, Steve Ford on the left, Mike on the right, and his wife, and Susan Ford next to the president. And these, the moments that I documented really were, there were a lot of uplifting ones and a lot of really sad ones. And I felt very much not part of the family so much as like just friends, you know, as well as being the chief photographer. And then the transition. This is in the Oval Office alone. Jimmy Carter came in. This was, by the way, the first time Jimmy Carter had ever been in the White House. And President Ford reached over and said, you know, I haven't really formally congratulated you. That's at this moment. And it was across his desk, wide angle shot. This is not your typical grip and grin photo, but in a way it's symbolic metaphor for, you know, the two small people, one who was president, one who would be, in the immenseness of the job reflected in this photo. And the other thing that's important to know, and it kind of brings back to the Biden transition, where the defeated president of the United States did not show up for the Biden inauguration. And the only other time that happened that I recall was when Andrew Johnson refused to ride in the carriage up to the Hill to watch the inauguration of U.S. Grant, who beat him. And you have to go back that far. I mean, obviously there were transitions where presidents were assassinated, or in Nixon's case, quit. But here we are under a portrait. And Ford opened the door to Carter. And it was, I wrote a blog. If you want to go to Kennerly.com and look at the blogs, I wrote 2 blogs about this, which related to how poorly the former president performed. He did not invite the Bidens to the White House, did not make the ride up to the Hill, which, by the way, in most cases were rides made by people who didn't want to ride together, who were political enemies or defeated by the guy in the car. And Ford opened up and said, even offered Jimmy Carter his private office, and couldn't have been a more perfect transition. And it was painful. It was painful. It's hard to lose, to get beaten in any athletic contest, but this was the presidency, and it was close up until the 2000 election. It was, I think, the closest election in U.S. history. And this is Ford. This is the private office right next to the Oval. This is Dorothy Downton, who's President Ford's personal assistant, looking at Jimmy Carter like he just landed from Mars. And anyway, it was a kind of an amusing moment. And then the day before the Fords left office, Mrs. Ford walked by the cabinet room, First Lady Betty Ford, and said, you know, I've always wanted to dance on the cabinet room table. And the people accompanying the Secret Service and a couple other folks thought she was joking, but I didn't. And she's a former Martha Graham dancer, and she kicked her shoes off and jumped up on the table and planted the feminist flag right in the middle of this very male domain up until that point. President Ford had one woman, Carla Hills, in his cabinet. But generally, women had not sat around that table as cabinet officers. Certainly that has changed in a positive way. And this was a camera that I mounted in the presidential limo. I had to tell Tip O'Neill, who was majority leader at that time, to stay off to the left. He was a big guy. And when Jimmy Carter saw this later, when I'm doing the book research, he said it was an uncomfortable ride. But Ford made the ride. He invited the Carters over to the White House in the Blue Room to have the coffee, to get in the car, to ride at the Hill, even defeated. And this is how it works in our country, peaceful transitions. We had a transition that was not peaceful after the January 6th debacle. And it's shameful. I mean, I don't know what other word you could use to describe it, that we pride ourselves on not having transitions at the point of a gun. And this really is symbolic. And there have been many other presidents that rode together. Truman and Eisenhower hated each other, but they did it because that's what we do in this country. Fast forward, photographing Anwar Sadat at the pyramids for a time, Man of the Year illustration. He had gone to Israel, and I was on that trip with him, and they made him Man of the Year. That's another subject today with Elon Musk becoming Man of the Year, probably number 50 on a list of people who should have become Person of the Year, rather. I was Man of the Year at the time. Liz Cheney should have been considered for that, and she is acting heroically. Anyway, this photograph by David Burnett of me photographing Sadat, I got him to come out to the pyramids. My dad was a traveling salesman. What I realized he was really selling as I traveled around with him when I was a kid was himself, that if people like you and respond to you, they will buy your shit, essentially. And so I learned how to sell people things they didn't always want, which is to get them to go, in this case, pose in front of the pyramids for an illustration, or to let me in their lives with the camera to see them in real life and how they were doing their job. This is the picture I took. I had originally had him facing me, and then I asked him, the sun was coming in late afternoon and crossing that shadow, and I asked him to stand in profile. Again, this is an illustration. This is not obviously a news photograph, so it's an environmental portrait. One of my best, I think, and it was very dramatic all in. He was assassinated because of the Israel trip, but peace with Israel lasts to this day. He and Menachem Begin, the Prime Minister of Israel at the time, shared the Nobel Peace Prize for this enduring legacy. I was in Jonestown, probably the worst thing I've seen, certainly the worst thing I've seen in my life. This is the vat of Kool-Aid. It was actually Flavor Aid, which is a British knockoff, but it's drinking the Kool-Aid came from this that was laced with cyanide. I was one of the few people to get it in there. I wouldn't have wished this on anybody. There were over 900 people died, and this is an aerial photo I took. The most shocking sight ever. And we didn't know that this had happened, and managed to get into the area. And I took this as we came closer to Jonestown. I thought I could see all these people. I thought we're around this pavilion. This is out in the middle of nowhere in Guyana. As we got closer, realized they were dead. And I still can't get over it. I mean, I can look at it and talk about it, but the fact that it's happened, and it was not mass suicide as much as it was mass murder. There were dozens of kids who were killed by their parents. You can't even place any logic on what happened there. It's impossible. And a much better story was photographing Ansel Adams for the cover of Time. This is up at near his place in Monterey. And this is taking the picture. The photo was made by John Sexton. No, it was Alan Ross made this, one of his assistants. And this is a picture Ansel and I like. We call this the cover that missed. He had these fake glasses, and it really showed his sense of humor. Really a funny guy. Didn't take himself that seriously. He and I became really close friends. And I was one of the last instructors while he was teaching at the Yosemite workshop that he made famous. Another camera ride or picture. Reagan beat Carter, you have the same deal, riding up to the hill. Reagan and Gorbachev at Geneva, and I'm going to start picking up the pace a little because I know we have the time, but I want people to be able to talk. This was an inside job. I managed to get inside the Reagan Gorbachev summit at Geneva in 1985, exclusive for Time magazine. One of my prouder accomplishments, and it was selling the White House staff on the idea of letting me in. And they said, as long as no one else asked, and astonishingly, no one else asked. And so I got in, and this was the moment after the meeting broke up, and Gorbachev was entranced with Ronald Reagan. I mean, they totally hit it off. You cannot undervalue the importance of personal diplomacy. And they had a great relationship until their second meeting, where I was also there on the outside. This is in Reykjavik in Iceland, and the thing blew up. And I got this shot, and Reagan is conveying, well, there you go again, Gorby. And it was all about satellites and weapons in space and the strategic arms limitation. And we had, because of Arnold Drapka, the picture editor of Time at that point, and Dirk Halstead said, we need to take a picture transmitter up, a leaf scanner, which is really new technology, and in case something happens. And it did. This is on a Sunday night. This picture was on the cover of Time the next day. Now, that's no big deal these days, because that's how we do it. We upload cameras or pictures from the middle of the desert in Saudi Arabia, but not then. This was not a normal situation. And this was Time magazine basically kicking ass in one of the biggest stories, certainly in that 10-year period. Reagan became Man of the Year. I made this photo through the, this is a lead photo of Reagan working at his desk. And one of the beauties of back then was that politicians just got along. They didn't throw mud at each other for the most part. This is Vice President George Bush with Democrat Speaker of the House, Tip O'Neill, and they're waiting for Ronald Reagan to come in for the 1983 State of the Union address. And I don't know what the joke was, but I unfortunately never asked Bush or Tip O'Neill what they were talking about, but this is sitting right up before Reagan comes in. But the minute the Senate Sergeant of Arms came in and said, ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States, Ronald Reagan, this is what we got. 5 presidents at the Reagan Library. Bush is president at this point. He'd been the VP for Reagan. Reagan had beat Carter. Carter had beaten Ford. And Ford had replaced Nixon. And so this is the first time that 5 presidents ever stood together in one place. A photo note, I decided to get off to the side. Everybody else shot from the front. I thought if there's a moment that this would be a better angle, and I think I was right. This was another transition. Clinton had beaten Bush. Bill Clinton is George W. Bush's age, who was the same, you know, they're both born in 1946, and Clinton beat old man Bush, but he had him over for coffee, rode up to the Hill, deeply pained by the situation, but he did it. He did it. None of this bullshit about stealing the election. And election night in Arkansas on the second time around. This was winning the second election, beating Bob Dole, who RIP, just passed away this last week. And then that woman, Monica Lewinsky. This is in the East Room where he cops to having sinned. And I don't think there's a fancy way to say that I've sinned. This is the lead in Newsweek magazine, and I was in there. Quite a moment. And this is a picture that's never been published. It will be in my big book at some point. But what it's like to listen to your president husband go on and on. And then in the room with election night, this is after Gore took back his concession, one of the most dramatic nights politically in my life. And there you have the three Bushes, ex-President Bush, George W., governor, and then the governor of Florida, which had suddenly become a tie. And they're watching the TV. And Jeb Bush looks like his life is passing before him. This was, I'm exclusively in the room. And I made this photo with a Mamiya in a flash, actually. And it really was dramatic. Then flash forward, obviously we know, George, spoiler alert, Bush becomes president. The only second father-son duo since the Adams family. So which one was the Adams family? And Hillary is now a US Senator, and they got along very well. In fact, after the presidency, Bush Sr. And Bill Clinton became friends, and likewise with George W. Bush. There they are. This is in the inaugural stand that night, January 20th, 2001. First big meeting. This was Putin. Now, Putin's been around, as you can tell. This was taken in 2001 in Slovenia. 9/11, I was in Washington. This is the Pentagon right after it was hit. There was an F-16 plane flew by it. Next day with Bush, President Bush and Donald Rumsfeld, Secretary of Defense, who I have a great relationship with since he was chief of staff at the White House. So I got a lot of access. At that time, I was the only outsider to get in. And this is right at the moment that Afghanistan is being attacked. The day the missiles are heading and the troops, special forces going into Afghanistan after the 9/11 attack. 5 presidents in the Oval Office.
This is David Kennerly.
With Obama as president-elect here. And this was the Obama, I was one of the official photographers for the Obama inaugural book. And I was up on this is 2 days before the inaugural, and I was staying next to Denzel Washington, who had talked, and he wanted to stay up off stage. We're right sort of behind these screens. This attractive woman walks out, and I have no idea who this is. And I asked Denzel, I said, "Who is that?" And he kind of looks at me like this, and in his Academy Award voice said, "That's Beyonce, you idiot," which he did not have to say. And this, at least I had him outgunned with my Canon 1 to 400 millimeter. And George Bush leaves the White House. Yet again, a president going up, although he was not defeated by Barack Obama. He beat Al Gore. And so this is Obama walking around. This is walking out of the White House for the last time. Never looked back. And then that night, I was in this elevator going around to the inaugural balls with now President and Mrs. Obama. And so this is Pete Souza and I and Callie Schell were in this elevator. This is kind of the wide shot, but I managed to get an angle where I could see both of them without the other staff. And this incredible moment happened where it just goes to the heart of their relationship. It kind of looks like a high school prom picture. He's given her his coat. It was really chilly in there. And this picture for everything I know, really epitomizes the relationship with the Obamas. And interestingly, in 8 years, I never went into the White House while he was president. Pete never invited his former colleagues over. And neither did Eric Draper during 8 years of George W. Bush. This is the cover picture I took that night. This is in the reviewing stand in front of the White House. The first picture I ever took of him, it was in 2015 when he was starting to run for president in Republican debates. Literally the first frame I ever made of Donald Trump is that one. I think the attitude is held up pretty well though. And with Hillary in Iowa, the day that, this is for CNN now, I'm shooting for them. This is the day that James Comey announced he was reopening the email investigation. And I wrote a blog about this too that you can find on my website, that this was the day Hillary Clinton lost that election. And flash forward, I was then for the last 2 weeks covering these two and this is Victory Night. This is the night, this is in the New York Ballroom in New York City at the Hilton, and Trump is claiming victory. And this was not an out of context moment. And 3 weeks later, CNN, one of the people had worked with, knew Jared really well and asked Donald Trump to pose for a picture for the cover of it was called Unprecedented, the 2016 election book that CNN did. I was principal photographer with Callie, who was covering the other candidate, Hillary. And what's weird, this is Trump's private office. You can see in the background, like this couch is just covered with all sorts of stuff people had given him and Trump bobbleheads and all that. His desk is immediately to the right. And I mean, there's a lot of information in this iPhone picture that was taken by Scott Wiseman, I believe. Yeah, Scott took it, who was my assistant. There were just the two of us and somebody helping. But I'll just show you the sequence of photos. This is a 2-minute photo session. I had it all figured out what I wanted to do, obviously. The first one of him smiling, I thought you didn't see him smile that much, so it didn't look very natural to me. So I said, okay, we've got that. How about giving me the "you're fired" look from The Apprentice? So that's the next frame. And I said to him, I said, wow, that's a little too scary. Can we go somewhere in between? And that became the cover of the book, kind of a little half smile. And in his 4 years as president, he did not pose very often for, I don't know what the number is, but I think less than 5 formal portraits. This is president-elect time. And then at the inaugural, where Barack Obama made the ride in the car, Vice President, now ex-President Joe Biden at the left. I only had one frame of the three of them together, and this is it. I was up on the balustrade taking that shot. And another quick one, I have the video of this, and this is at the opening of the National African American Museum of History and Culture. I was there for Bank of America, who was one of the big sponsors of the museum, is also my biggest corporate client. And this is when the Obamas come in before the ceremony starts, to see what happens here. That was the hug. And John Lewis over on the left. My full frame is this one. And for some reason, unfortunately, President Obama had his tongue out, but that's okay.
David, the sound.
David, you're muted.
Okay. David?
There we go.
Okay.
Okay. All right, I'm going to race to the finish line here.
Hey, David, take it.
This is back to this picture. I think it may have been the first time I impressed my three boys, so younger generation, obviously. And this picture went viral. I think on my Facebook page, it got like 750,000 likes or something, and on Instagram and Twitter. And this is a great moment. It transcends politics. It's how things should be, even though it was a quick hug. George W. Bush made the National African American Museum happen by signing the bill into law, creating it, and insisting that it be on the National Mall. And that's like tough territory to get a museum. Bob Dole did it with World War II. But so it's a Black woman hugging this white guy who's a Republican, and it just has every element. And I know that these two people really get along well, but this to me is one of my favorite pictures for what it represents. And onward, these are the articles of impeachment being carried through Statuary Hall in the US Capitol, the first impeachment of Donald Trump. And an early photo of Sandra Day O'Connor, the first two women to be on the Supreme Court in that same place, surrounded by statues of men. And then Justice Ginsburg lay in state in this room after she died. And Bernie and Joe Biden, this is during the truncated, abbreviated 2020 election. This is in New Hampshire at a Democrat debate. And a picture, a close-up of Joe Biden at a town hall speaking about his son, Beau, who had died of cancer. It still affects him. This is genuine. And it's one of the beauties of photography, one of the more penetrating look into somebody. And here I think it happened. And it was about all I did on the election. I did one Trump event up there, and then Biden. And Biden spent an hour after he gave his talk listening to people who would share their moments of pain with them. And he listened to them. And to me, it wasn't an act at all. The cameras had long been turned off. This is John Harrington's photo from December 6th. I was not back there for that. Pence, in one of the righteous things he did as the vice president, was after all this stuff had happened, said, let's get back to work, and then saw it through to certify the Electoral College victory. And all the more that comes out about this, I mean, I just hope a bunch of people go to jail in the administration, because they were trying to overthrow our democracy. I don't know how else you'd look at it. This is not a time to be polite about this. And there are traitors in our midst now. And I mean, I've been on this planet a long time covering politics. And in my lifetime, certainly there's never been anything like it. The Civil War is, you'd have to go back to find out anything close. I don't know. And this is Liz. I've known Liz since she was 9 years old. Her dad and I are close. I was close with the family. This is the day she was stripped of her number 3 Republican ranking by the petulant people that she was working with. And this is her right after it happened. And my first pictures of Joe Biden as president, this is July 4th at the on the south lawn of the White House, the place that has seen so much history. And very quickly, Afghanistan, where I spent a month going around and lecturing about First Amendment to Afghan women and men who were journalists. I was at Herat, I lectured at Kabul U. I feel so bad about what's happened, particularly to the women now who hung their necks out to tell the story. This is one of them. It was the editor of the biggest paper in Afghanistan, and a symbolic photo. Women walk alone now there, and this was in Herat, and to me, just underscores how sad this is for all people of Afghanistan now under Taliban rule. And a quick picture of Colin Powell, who died. I went to his funeral, him as chairman of the Joint Chiefs, in the Riyadh War Room with Defense Secretary Cheney. And a picture that symbolizes Washington. Nobody ever goes away until they check out usually. You know, if you look in that group, everybody's had several jobs. Jim Baker, Chief of Staff, Secretary of Treasury, Secretary of State, Colin Powell, Secretary of State, Chairman Bush, Congressman, all the way through to the presidency. In the back, Scowcroft, NSC advisor to 2 presidents. Bob Gates, CIA director in this picture, then became Secretary of Defense. Cheney, White House Chief of Staff, Congressman, Secretary of Defense, and Vice President of the United States. And a letter from Powell, a portrait I did of him. Somalia. This is a child who was named after him in Somalia. I'm just going to speed. John Kerry and 2 Vietnam vets both became candidates, losing candidates for their parties. John McCain's funeral. The McCain family asked me to be their official photographer. And thank you to Canon, Center for Creative Photography, and anything you want to look at, go to kennerly.com. And I'm going to unshare, and sorry I took so long, but it felt,
No, that was great, David. No.
how do I get rid of that? There we go. Okay. Okay,
David,
Frank,
I mean,
well,
that's
not out of runway. You're,
yeah, no, David, that's a
Can't
little
hear
bit
you.
breathtaking.
oh, there we go. Got it.
Yeah, no, that body of work is absolutely breathtaking. I mean, just yeah. So I have to ask you. So you see Robert Kennedy for the first time, right? What is it about that particular event that said to you, I want in, I want to be a political photographer? Like, if you can crystallize that for us.
It's a good question. I was 19 years old when I took that picture. And so I was just starting out, really. I mean, I hadn't, I knew I wanted to be a news photographer. I had started, as you can see from my early press card, it was actually 62, 63, but my first published photo was 63. But I was also sports writing. But when that picture got published, it was a crappy picture. It was a guy crossing home plate. It was nothing dramatic, but seeing a photo coming out of the camera, was a 4x5 picture, and then ending up in a newspaper excited me. That's when I started to think about how your vision could make it out there into the world. And like, I don't know if this relates or not, but when I was in grade school, my favorite, and I think they did it every couple of weeks, they would have show and tell day. So you'd bring something in and show the class. Like one day I brought in a stuffed armadillo. And then one time I brought my dog who knocked over 4 kids on the playground. And that was not a hit. But I think it's always been my desire to show people stuff, you know, and there's no better way to do that than to show photographs of what you see. And of course, that became a career. And I think in it, particularly the news business, where we go places people don't want to go to show them things they don't want to see. I mean, that's one definition of what I think I've done. I also believe in the power of photography. And that's when I felt like left behind. I felt when I saw Kennedy and then Epridge go on the plane, it photographer, and Steve Shapiro was there too, by the way, getting on the plane, the door closes, the plane takes off, and they're on it. I mean, what an adventure. It was so exciting, the idea of
And you
that.
wanted to be on.
I wanted to be on it. The other person who was very influential to me was life photographer Larry Burroughs.
Right.
And I don't know if you saw it, you can see it online somewhere, I'm sure. It was called, it was about Yankee Papa 13, which is the call sign of a Marine helicopter in 65. This is as the US just got into the war with their troops, where, by the way, Eddie Adams and Dirk Kallstad were there in Da Nang when the Marines landed, UPI and AP. And so that life cover came right after I graduated from high school and right before I took the Kennedy picture. But it was like, it was a Shakespearean 3-part play. Happy Marine gunner gets on plane, the helicopter, they go out, they get in the middle of a rescue mission. They were taking Vietnamese troops into the field, but one of their other choppers got shot down, Americans. They rescued them, but 2 of them were dead. And the cover of the magazine is this extraordinary photo of this dead guy in the foreground and that formerly happy-go-lucky door gunner, crew chief, like screaming. And then, but the third shot, it was something you never saw in coverage of the Vietnam War. That same guy alone in a room weeping, like his head down. And I was so stunned by that. I really was. And the combination of Larry Burroughs, whom I never met, he was killed. When I went to Vietnam, I was replacing Kent Potter of UPI, who was going to move up to Bangkok and had been a combat photographer. Andre Hewitt of AP was on the chopper, and Larry Burroughs was on the chopper. And they were shot down, and a photographer named Shimamoto from Newsweek, they all got killed. Yeah. And, as I was on my way out to Vietnam, but the combination of Burroughs, so you had the adventure of, bad word, but war coverage and combined with political coverage, and they're all the same goddamn thing. I mean, I got a chance to be in the room taking photos of people who were starting wars and ending them, essentially. But you never saw it from the inside like that very much. And I think it's just my innate curiosity about what makes people tick, like what's it like to be there when somebody said, okay, let's send the troops into Beirut or wherever. And I've had that experience. And so and to be there when the Vietnam War ended, to be in the room, it's not that dramatic really, but it had a big implication. And so that, I mean, it's a long answer to a good question.
Yeah. So now you're 23 and you're on Air Force One, right? I mean, what's that, that experience? And then by the time you get off that plane, you've won the Pulitzer Prize and you're all of 24. Like, what's the perspective that you're feeling as your career is really, it's starting and you're hitting incredible benchmarks already?
Well, when the 23-year-old young wire photographer my first ride on Air Force One was Nixon.
Right.
And I have a flight certificate. It's all part of my archive down in Arizona. So the wire, it was the 707. If you ever, anybody, when they come to LA, go to the Ronald Reagan Library. That airplane is in an atrium there. It's an incredible display, really. And it's the same one, 27,000 is the tail number. But as the UPI photographer, the small pool would be in Air Force One, AP UPI reporters and photographers, a network person, another pool. I think it was like 7 or 8 or 9 people right in the back of the thing. And so that's how I got on Air Force One for the first ride. And then obviously it became a habit once I became the White House photographer, but it was that same airplane. And it was thrilling. I mean, I never get over being where I happen to be at the moment. I never got cynical about it. I was always like every day when I drive into the White House through the Northwest or the Southwest gate between the EOB and the White House, I had a parking space like 4 up from the vice president's. It was, and walk right into my office in the ground floor of the West Wing. I never got over it. And even to this day, when I look back through pictures, like a lot of the stuff you've seen today, I never get over it. It's like, how could any one person have done all that? And how could that person be me?
Yeah.
I mean, I swear to God, and it's not false modesty. I don't feel that way about it.
Yeah. So as those events are happening in your life and you're covering these, who are you sharing this with? Like, you know, do you say, Dad, you won't believe this, Ma, I just did this, or your sisters? I mean, like, who did you share those incredible moments with? You know, like, just like, you know, Dad, can you believe this? You know, what was that?
There was certainly some of that. And another element here really is about the secrecy side of it. That Gerald Ford once said to me, your gravestone should read, "Here lies the worst source in Washington," because I never talked about classified, I mean, to this day. And I think all photographers who do this are like that. I think our access depends on not talking about what we're hearing in the room. And I even in personal relationships, I don't feel compelled or the desire to, if you told me something in confidence, I mean, that's all the further it goes. I've
Right.
never been the source for a leak of some kind. Again, I'm not alone in this.
So you mentioned the Ford family. I mean, how did that relationship start and then become? I mean, it feels like you're really close friends with that family. And if you could speak to that and the access piece, because I read somewhere where you allowed all the other photographers into the White House, which was something that wasn't done prior.
That's right. Yeah, I think I'm really proud of it. Every time I see and I'm fairly thin-skinned actually, and so I which is why I don't normally read any comments on any social media venue, because people tend to go negative on these things, but guilty also. But one of the things I'm really proud of, and I could do it because of my relationship with the president, who liked photographers. And he basically liked the press people, even though he'd get mad, sometimes at what was written. I mean, that's not unique to any head of state, any president, any politician. I mean, it's like the difference between Ford and one particular other person is he didn't feel that we should abolish the First Amendment because he said something bad about him. Ford knew it was part of the game. And even though it didn't make him happy on occasions, he said, wow, that didn't happen that way. I mean, but he believed in the Constitution. What a concept, right? And so, but for me, I was able to, and I think the number was over 75 photographers who came in for exclusive, not for the daily photo app stuff. But like Dirk Halstead coming in to shoot something for Time, Eddie Adams coming in to shoot something for AP, Fred Ward came in and spent almost 3 months on, they couldn't go into classified meetings, but a lot goes on around there that's not, secret.
And you're the ultimate gatekeeper on that at that time.
I was.
Yeah.
I didn't have to go through the press office. I could go to the president and say, Wally McNamee is doing a story on an economic thing, and can he come and hang out with me? And so if you went in with me, which was the only way you were going to get in there, that meant you would let me know when you got what you needed, not like somebody looking at the fucking watch, and that's what normally happens. like, okay, you got 1 minute to make this great inside shot, and so like, I'm a photographer. This was my chance to like help people out. I was running the chicken coop at that point,
Yeah.
and I shared it. And I will say that among my colleagues, some of them have not been generous at all, and have taken some big hits on it.
Yeah. So,
But rather than get into it with them, I just
Yeah.
did it my way. I know what I did, and I know why I could do it. And you can make excuses like I didn't have that relationship with the president, or it was up to the press office, blah, 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 which I totally get all that. But all these people who came in, if we went to Portland or we went to Cincinnati, that I get requests from like the Cincinnati Enquirer photographer wants to come on, fly out on Air Force One, from Washington. And so I wanted to share it.
Right, you return the favor, right?
I never get selfish. I mean, I'll screw you big time on a job, but head to head, if I outshoot you somehow, or I get an exclusive because I outthought you, like Survivor, right? Outplay, outthink, whatever. So,
but
when I was the White House photographer, I wanted other people to have their point of view of Gerald R. Ford, and he was willing to do it. And so it was not, there were no restrictions. You go in and like, the other thing is all these photographers wouldn't take advantage of it. They wouldn't hang out just to hang out for 20 minutes because they could. As soon as they got what they needed, they would go out, and I knew what they needed. I knew if they were pushing it too much, and I might kind of raise an eyebrow or something. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, for that young photographer out of Cincinnati, it's a dream, right? He or she was able to get in, and you sort of repaid the favor back.
It's a dream. Nobody'd ever been able to do that, and certainly during Nixon, I mean, forget it. During Oki's time, there were instances, but not many. But if you think about probably, let's compare Barack Obama, 8 years of the presidency to my 2. And I probably had easily 25 times more access, more photography. Maybe that's a big number, 20, whatever it is. In 8 years compared to my 2, because I thought what would I want
That's right.
if we went in? And the night that Ford became president, actually, I just remember this. It was a really emotional moment for me. After he got through, we had our conversation about the White House photo office running the show, and then he said, "Hey, let's go watch me being sworn in on TV." So it tells me that must have been around 10 o'clock at night, because it would have been the local news at that point, right? Probably 10. So he'd been president for like 9 hours and 55 minutes or whatever. And the TV didn't work in his study in their little house. And he said, "Okay, let's go upstairs." The only TV that worked was in their bedroom. So Mrs. Ford and I and 2 of the kids and the president of the United States, who's sitting on the edge of the bed watching the news as he gets sworn in. And that line came up about our long national nightmare is over. And he said, "I just wasn't sure if I should say that or not." And I said, "Oh, you should have said that. All right. That's the only thing anybody's going to remember from that speech." And then when that was over, and I said, "Look, you have a big day tomorrow being president of the United States, I said, I stood up, and he took my one hand with both of his. He said, "By taking this job, might this be bad for you, considering what's happened among your colleagues, considering Nixon and the bad feelings with the press?" And I said, I just said to him, "My friends, my colleagues are going to be really happy that I'm going to be in the White House." And I said, "I'm going to help them out."
So
And that was that night. And it was so touching that and that's just the way he was. I mean, he was worried about it. In fact, flash forward to another moment, the day, well, when the election happened, it went late into the night, like 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, and there had not been a concession. It was so close. I mean, any one of 2 or 3 states could have swung it to him. It wasn't like this landslide that Trump had on one instance when he won, and having it stolen from him by the same numbers the next time around. But he was knew at that point he couldn't win, and so he then probably about 9 o'clock in the morning or so, after 2 or 3 hours of sleep, went in the Oval Office. And he was hoarse from having campaigned, so he could barely talk. And so I was in the Oval Office, and they got Carter on the phone, and Dick Cheney, who was the chief of staff, was sitting with Jack Marsh. We were the only ones in the Oval, and he kind of croaked out that I want you to hear my statement, Jimmy, but I can't talk, as you can tell. And so then Cheney read the concession speech that he was about ready to walk out into the press room and give. I just talked to Jimmy Carter and President-elect Carter, whatever it was he said. But he didn't. And so we got in the press room, and the whole family had come down to the Oval Office, went into the press room, and Ford, as I recall, I probably could look it up, this film of it, but he kind of made excuse, said he couldn't talk, and Mrs. Ford was going to read what Carter had been read by Cheney. Well, then she read that. And then before that, we did the pictures in the Oval that you saw. But when we went back in the Oval Office, it was just me and Terry O'Donnell, his personal aide, and the president. And that was a bad moment, and we're in there alone with him, and he comes over and puts his arm around Terry and said, "Terry, I've never really expressed how grateful I am for everything you've done for me. You've been here every step of the way." And so Terry has tears like coming down his face, and so did I. And I'm taking a picture of Terry like in this moment, and it just it took me back to what he said that night. Like he was always so considerate. It wasn't being political. It wasn't doing it like.
He was just a decent
It
guy.
was genuine. I mean, nobody saw these moments, and I mean, the worst thing I ever heard him say, and the whole time I was with him, and like hundreds of hours behind the scenes, was one time he was talking about Jim Schlesinger, who was his Secretary of Defense, who he said, I don't like him very much. Don't say I said that. That was the worst thing I ever heard him say about anybody. And it was not by being polite, I mean, it was just, that's why I could work for the guy.
Yeah. So, I mean, over the years, you actually, built this relationship of a family friend and colleague and confidant on certain levels. I read that story about you going to Vietnam and, giving him what you really saw, right?
Yeah.
How is that night, David, when they lost? You're with the family, it's got to be, it's got to be humbling. And there you are as a journalist, as a friend, and you have to cover it. What was that room like there?
Well, it was just like, the thing is, I never gave up on what I was doing. I didn't take a picture to make him look good or bad. He would have been pissed off at me for that.
Yeah.
That he wrote the most wonderful letter to me. I don't have a copy of it in front of me, but what we all had to resign or want. I didn't want to work for Jimmy Carter. Not that they would have wanted that, certainly.
Yeah, let me interrupt.
My whole staff ended up working for him, which was fine with me.
Yeah.
But he didn't appoint an official photographer.
Right.
It was too much of the imperial presidency thing.
Do you get a little pigeonholed with Democrat and Republican photographers? I mean, is there any of that goes on, in the trenches? Like, I can't have David.
You could, I mean, you could, but I wasn't a political person. I mean,
Yeah.
Ford asked me at one point, I mean, I can disclose it now, but in 68, which is the first time I could vote, I turned 21 in 68 and I registered. My parents were Republicans, but not political.
Yeah.
And I come from Oregon, where Mark Hatfield was a senator. He was like, these days would be considered a left-wing bomb thrower. So I was kind of a Republican because at that time, and the kind of people I liked, and Ford it was more partisan than that probably, but when I registered as a Republican. I voted for Nixon because he said he would end the war in Vietnam. That was very pertinent to me. And anybody my age, and he was full of shit and did not. And probably more people got killed in Vietnam on his watch than on Johnson. But if it hadn't been for Watergate, maybe they would have brought that up. But and so when Ford became president, when I was in the Oval with him one time, and he's looking up at the ceiling, the president's seal up there, and he said, I've been a good Republican all my life. All I ever wanted to be was Speaker of the House, and here I am in the Oval Office. And then he looked at me and said, I've never asked you, are you a Republican or a Democrat? And then he said, don't answer that. I mean, he didn't care. And it was like, I didn't care. It had nothing to do with the job. I never gave up my news photographer credentials, the objective observer, being objective. And I shot through tears, and I shot through difficult times. And I always I think I honored my vow to be an observer, and so in other words, I didn't do anything different. It's just that I got way more involved, obviously, because I was involved with the family, and kids who were practically my age, and I was definitely the youngest staffer in the White House.
So give me the sense of how that happened with the Betty Ford photograph on the cabinet table, and why did it take 15 years to release it?
Well, I told the story. She was impetuous and mischievous. Yep. And she is to this day, one of my absolute most favorite people. Bravery, heroic is a word you could use with her. When she was diagnosed with breast cancer, not even a month into Gerald Ford's first month of office. And that was a tough hit. A lot of times that would certainly lead to death in those days. She got the diagnosis, and then her advisors, her press secretary said, look, you don't have to talk about this. You don't have to say why you're going to go into the Bethesda Naval Hospital. It's your business. And she said, it's not my business. This is everybody's business. The women never talk about breast cancer. They don't say the word breast. And she was adamant that she go out and talk about it. And also, President Ford stood by her and agreed with that too, because she wanted to do it. I mean, he loved her, and he cared about her, and he admired her, and he supported her, and vice versa. And so that was the first big one. And there were untold thousands of women went out and got breast cancer
tests.
Checkups, including Happy Rockefeller, who went in because of that, and Nelson's the second lady, and discovered that she had breast cancer, and she had a mastectomy also. But they were a team. And then afterwards, with admitting with her problem with alcohol and painkillers and all that, and started the Betty Ford Clinic. And I've gotten people into that program, like back in the good old days, we were heavy drinkers, not drug users in my business so much. People don't believe it. I said, I've never ever seen anybody take cocaine. to this day, which is an astonishing kind of a statistic.
From that generation, yeah.
But I didn't use it, and my friends didn't use it, but we sure as hell drank a lot, and it created a lot of problems for certain people. But she did that because she's was so honest, I just spent so much time. I was very aware of different things that were going on,
And the photograph on the table.
Well, like I said, she'd walk by there. It was the last day that they were in office, and she'd been walking around the West Wing saying goodbye to people.
Right.
And when we walked by the open door of the cabinet room, it has nothing but portraits of men, and only men basically had occupied that space. And that's when she said she wanted to dance on the cabinet room table, and she took her shoes off, and she was a former Martha Graham dancer, and leapt up there and posed. She didn't actually dance.
Right.
And then when she came down, she kind of went like this. She said, "That'll about do it for this place."
Oh, is that right?
It was her feminist side that did that. I mean, she was a supporter of the Equal Rights Amendment, which FYI to this day has not been passed. And she and President Ford supported her in everything.
Yeah.
And even though he may not have agreed, I mean, he didn't disagree with that one, but they had very few dust-ups that I ever saw. I mean, and she raised the kids. That's part of why she had a drinking. I have a mom. My mother was an alcoholic, and I didn't know. I mean, at the time, and I didn't know. Like I don't believe that I believed that about Mrs. Ford. And it really was exacerbated after she left the White House, a real sense of loneliness and more. I mean, she felt lonely in the White House, but I know what that looks like, but I didn't recognize it, which is kind of weird to me. I've thought a lot about this.
So David, do you have anything else you'd like to tell us? I mean, this
What
is
about all these nice folks? I don't know how many people are here, but if anybody do you have any questions for anybody else? Frank, you're dominating the whole
Sorry,
thing.
David. Yeah,
That's
any
your job,
question?
man. It's your job.
Oh, and, in the chat room, it's all just accolades. What a great evening. I mean,
Frank, I have a question.
Yes, go.
Mr. Kennerly?
Hi.
Hi. What has been through your career one assignment that really stayed with you,
Oh, geez.
that impacted you?
Well, Jonestown is right up there. It's the only one that really gave me nightmares, believe it or not.
And when did you get there?
What's that?
What when you got there after everyone had already passed?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, no, there's no way anybody knew about it.
Right.
When Leo Ryan went there with
The mayor of San Francisco, right?
no. Leo was the congressman from San Francisco, the Bay Area,
Right.
and
Jackie Spears, David.
was his AA, I think. And she just announced she's retiring from Congress, but she was shot there too. Leo Ryan was killed. The cameraman and reporter, or the reporter for NBC, was killed by these people, because Jim Jones ordered it. So, and that happened. They were visiting. All these people were saying, "Please get us out of here." I mean, they're basically trapped. And it's sort of like these cultish people who attack the Capitol. I mean, they are cultists, and this is the same kind of thing, except they were isolated and totally controlled by Jim Jones. That's why that happened. They were ordered by him to kill themselves. It's a long story, which I wasn't there for that, but I did see the aftermath. One of the few to get in there, and that was very disturbing, particularly as you can imagine. I'm stepping over bodies, and under that
Do you
pavilion,
hear a random person talking?
So there was like hundreds dead.
Yeah.
there were 928 dead. That whole pavilion had people underneath it and these outbuildings. And I saw Jones's body. It looked to me like he'd shot himself in the head, and he was there. I took pictures of him, and yeah, that's a big one. But honestly, I've done so many things. There are a lot of good things.
Yeah.
I can't remember any of them, but
You're
it just, there have been so many incredible instances of not being in the room or being on the battlefield or and I still do it. I haven't quit.
your archive is like a history of lesson for the 20th century.
Well, we're now 21 years into the 21st century, and I have been photographing since, professionally since 66. And think about that. And one of the reasons my archive was valuable is of rich historical content that I owned.
Very much.
Obviously, I didn't own the Ford White House stuff, but that's public domain, which I have access to, like you do. Except for the UPI days, almost. And one of the reasons I used work freelance was their contract. With the contract allowed me to own my pictures, and that was important, even though it was kind of a high wire act with no net, financially speaking, through most of my career. And it's the way, that's why my archive was 97% owned by me, which if you work for a newspaper or wires, or chances are you don't own your archive.
Thank you.
And therefore can't sell it. Yeah.
Any other question? People jump in there if you want to ask, or put it in the chat room and I can ask. With the Ethel Kennedy shot, are there sometimes, David, you shoot something, you say, I should keep this to myself, or that had enough distance to it where it felt okay? You ever have that come to that kind of crossroad?
Well, I mean, there have been times when I haven't taken pictures, like if someone, like in a village in Cambodia or something like that, what I found, like, I don't like getting into people's face with the camera. I don't like the paparazzi thing, and didn't do that. What I've found really most of the time is that people want, if it's the situation of war or something like that, the people want others to see what is happening to them. It's pretty remarkable, really. And so I don't go around asking people like their pictures, but you do sense it if somebody doesn't want it, obviously.
You can tell.
And I'm not, I respect other people. I don't like intruding into their lives. But people like Spiro Agnew, who's trying to dodge the press, is fair game to me. He's a public official. Fuck him. And so I had no sympathy for those people who are on the public payroll and they're trying to tell you what to do. I can get angry about certain things because I have my own sense of right and wrong, but I don't think I take advantage of people. I feel, privileged to be doing what I do, but there's a responsibility. There was a whole National Press Photographers kind of a issue, like you should ask people's permission to take their picture. Are you out of your mind? I'm going to go walking around in New York on the street and say, I want to take your picture? No
How do you
way.
feel about taking pictures of minors?
Of what?
How do you feel about taking pictures of minors? Is that the same? Do you follow the same rule?
Of minors?
Yeah. Like, do you?
No, I mean, again, if kids are involved, like if you're out shooting, like in the world, and people are out in a public place, essentially you can take pictures of anybody that you want, but I find myself not going, I don't take pictures to embarrass people or any of that. Minors, like if you see a picture from Afghanistan with kids, they're like crying and after their car bomber and killed all their family and everything. That's part of unfortunate real life. But you can't use pictures of people out in public in like ads and stuff like that. I mean, it's only editorially. So, I mean, that's an absolute rule, you know, that if advertisers are making it appear that somebody's endorsing a product or any of that.
Right.
But I don't even think in my career, there have been so few times I've gotten releases from somebody. The only time you do it is if it's a commercial shoot that you
Right.
need that. But I don't, yeah, minors, I mean, should be protected. I see like on TV, they like fuzz out people's faces like kids and stuff like that.
True, that seems right.
I don't want to invade their privacy if that's the question.
Right. And David, what other sporting events did you cover or did you want to cover and circumstances didn't allow any
Well,
of that?
I used to be, as a UPI photographer, you're sort of a utility outfielder.
Yeah.
So I was a good sports photographer, baseball, football, obviously prize fighting. But quite frankly, I didn't think that sports really meant much. It wasn't, for me, not the kind of history that I care about. I appreciate great sports photographers like Neil Leifer and all these other people are really good at it. But that wasn't going to define my life. I was way more interested in, again, people who could start and stop wars or are not just making millions of dollars to get you to wear their stuff, and I mean, I enjoy sports, like watching it. I look, but I could have been I'm a good photographer. I could have been a good sports photographer as a career, or a good Hollywood photographer. None of those people make any difference to me. I appreciate what they do. It's just not my shtick. I mean, that's not what I care about. I care about big history, not sports history. And there have been historical events that are sports, certainly. Ali Fraser fight, that was a good example.
Yeah.
But it just didn't attract me.
I do have a question for you, David.
Yes, Emily.
Thank you. I'm wondering how the editing process works in the White House. Who has say and how much say over which photos are allowed to be printed or published? Like I know under one of the Bush administrations, either Laura or Barbara Bush had some say in what kind of photos of the kids were published or allowed to be out. And so
as well, she should have actually. I mean, yeah. Well, I mean, every administration is different. And also when you made like it was during Draper's time that it went from film to digital, which, I mean, he did a good job of making that transition. And one of the key factors, and I know I felt this too, I was looking through, in fact, Bush inaugural pictures, where I had done, some of them were on, they were digital. And my first digital picture that was published was when Clinton went to Vietnam, right after the 2000 election. As I said, put it finally went to Vietnam. Anyway, so I shot digital, but those files were so small and the cameras were like $30,000 cameras, but it was, at the beginning of it. And so I think Draper and I both felt the quality of digital had to get better, just from a historical point of view. And I think probably laments using digital earlier than when he might have. I don't know for sure, but I know for me, that's how I felt about it. But normally, my case was a little different because if I wanted to put out a picture, I could do it and I didn't ask for approval. But overall, I found it easier to run it through the press office. Plus, that was the other thing. I didn't like making handouts. So one of the reasons I had people come in was because I wanted other people to do it. I didn't want, and it was important to do handouts for things that nobody obviously could get it, people wanted, but that was not a steady diet. You know, honestly, I think I'm trying to, it may have been Obama's time or maybe at the end of Bush, I'm not sure. But the Obama campaign was using Flickr, I believe. And it may still have feeds on Flickr now. Hardly anybody knows what that is anymore, but they were just putting stuff out all the time. And I kind of objected to that. To me, it seemed like you were taking away jobs from photographers. And that if there was an opportunity, and I got into this discussion during Sousa's time, a lot of photographers really resented him for what they perceived as not helping them get access. And I'm not even talking about one-on-one stuff, but even like pool coverage. And granted, there are a lot more photographers. This is a long, winding subject. Generally, it'll be the press office people, though, who make those decisions. Or if the family doesn't want something, you can bet that won't get out. And maybe Barbara Bush. Are you talking about Barbara Bush or Laura Bush?
I can't remember which it was. I wish I
It could have
could.
been either. I mean, the W, they have the twin girls. That was it. Barbara Bush had like grandkids and stuff.
Tony has a
I
question.
don't know. David Valdez would be better to ask. But for the most part, the White House photographer doesn't make decisions on what's released. I think that's a fair statement.
Tony, you have a question?
Up here, yes. Hi, everyone. Mr. Kennerly, thank you for being here. My question actually is piggybacking off of Emily's. You've had other people curate your work, right? Making those choices on what images work. What did that teach you, and how do you now approach curating your own work? What makes that image powerful for you?
Yeah. Well, I've always been excuse me, sorry, I'm talking too much. I've always believed, I said this up front, of the value of picture editors. I mean, my career was made by good picture editors because we'd be out shooting stuff, shipping the film, and it's up to them to pick it. I mean, I rarely pick pictures out, just physically, you couldn't do it unless you were in the LA Bureau and developing film and picking one to put on the wire machine or something like that. But my Pulitzer Prize was the result of having a great editor looking at my pictures and then entering them into the Pulitzer contest. So like, if you represent yourself in court, you have a fool for a lawyer, according to the statement, which is probably true. In a way, you really need strong picture editors, but when it comes down to a final selection of what's going to be in the exhibition for me or my book on Ford or whatever, I worked very closely with editor, designer, and we'd have terrific flights, at the end of which I would win because it was my book. But there were many, many cases where I agreed that I wanted to get rid of this in favor of that. A good, healthy relationship. But it's not, is that your question? I mean, you're talking about I know curating. I mean, at Arizona, like Becky Semp is the curator I've been working with, and really was very responsible for landing this archive at Arizona. We were talking to other schools and formidable places, but yeah, I think it's essential to have other points of view in the conversation. I do think, depending on what's going on, if it's your book, you got to make the final cut on it. And but I'm really open to that, and I like the fights, and I don't like to play the card necessarily unless I absolutely think this has got to be the shot. But normally it's collaborative though. It's a good relationship is collaborative.
Agreed. What for you, when you're looking at your work, what are you looking for where you say between this and this, this is the powerful one, I need this one? Like, are there elements for you that just call out to you, pick me, choose me, love
Well,
me?
it's not, I mean, sometimes there are pictures that'll edit themselves, like Eddie Adams' moment, of the Saigon execution. I mean, there are just certain things, but 99% of the time, it's way more subtle than that. So you're looking at pictures that tell the story. It's a pretty hard question to answer, only because every situation is different. But it's not a volume thing. It's like, is this picture tell the story? Am I picking up on who this person is I'm photographing? And nowadays, like with wire photographers, particularly, you're in the field, you shoot like, let's just say it's a politician speaking, and you got to get that picture out 15 minutes after they start while they're still speaking. That's unfortunate to the degree that you might miss something. Certainly, if you look at the wire service mentality, and the best photographers in the business are wire photographers because they have to do so many different things. And now most of them have become their own editors in the field. And you're bound to miss stuff that way, just because that's the way it is. I mean, when I gave a lecture at the University of Missouri a couple of months ago, they teach photo editing there, and I was really happy to see it. It's a great journalism school. I was very supportive of them, doing that. And so I think it's hard to pick your own pictures when there's subtlety involved, but some, if you're lucky, this one cries out. But when I look back after, when I did a book called Photo Op, those pictures mainly had not been published. I mean, if you're looking at the percentage of my pictures that have been published, I would bet it's 0.5%, if that, maybe less. Just because if you shoot 100 pictures on assignment and 2 of them run, that's like, but if you look back 30 years later, like I did for this one book, all of a sudden, oh my God, there's this moment and that moment. It's just, it's like marinating. It's like producing a good wine sometimes, not always, but that pictures will emerge because of historical circumstances that happened in between when you took them and like 20 years later.
Yeah, I was going to say that. I was going to say that in regards to Hillary being in that same room with the impeachment of Nixon, and how history, turns it on its head. Any books?
Well, yeah, and because of her circumstances, because Hillary becomes one of the most famous people on the planet. And like I said, she's my age. If she, and full disclosure, I voted for her. I like her. I've known her a long time. I get along with her well. I've traveled with her. We're the same age. She would have been the only president born in 1947, actually. I don't know what it was about 46, but you got Bush, you got Clinton, you got Trump, you got Gore, even though he didn't make it. Mitt Romney was born in 47. Mitt's 3 days younger than I am. And I was covering his campaign, and I like him, nice guy. And I pointed out we were so close in age. I said, but there's one big difference between you and me. And he said, oh yeah, what's that? I said, he looked like, oh geez, what's he gonna say? I said, you're a tribute to clean living and I'm not.
There you go.
So he was amused. Yeah. He has a pretty good sense of humor. But thinking about my generation, all those people I mentioned are my generation, and then you had Barack Obama is like, was so young and kind of broke it. And then you had, that got turned upside down with another older white guy coming in to do it.
Yeah.
And who knows? And then a really older white guy.
David, question from Frank Scram. Any books in the work?
I'm working on two right now. One, it's going to be a book, not a photo book per se, is 50 short stories from my life.
Great.
And like Jonestown, I'll talk about that in detail, which is how I got in there. There's a lot to that story about journalism and of course, the immensity of it. And
We want you
then
back for that,
the
David.
kind of magnum opus book, which will be, by the time I get to it, it'll be probably 60 years of photography. I'm getting up there in that area. But if you look at first published photo, then it would be 2023. I could make that claim, you know.
Right.
But mainly I'm looking at 66 when I really started. And so that would be, there's a good editing point for you. If you figure a big photo book might have, I mean, a lot would be 150 pictures. And if you look at my career, I mean, on any given day, I might have taken 3 or 4 pictures that should be included, certainly, or you would normally think that. So this is going to boil, you know, I'm not looking every year has to have more or less necessarily, but the year of 71, 50 years ago, which included India-Pakistan War, Ali Fraser fight, fighting in Cambodia, the Vietnam War, all that. Then I got to pick out of that year, maybe 3 or 4 pictures, but the book in my career, professionally, even during that time, I maybe can't even do 2 pictures from one year. I mean, think about that.
That's amazing. Yeah, that's hard.
So that as an editing job is going to have to go, obviously stories and importance of events are all going to factor into the edit.
Right.
But my bird pictures probably are going to make it, which
Yeah.
somebody
Cat
asked me about
photographs.
my hobby. I said, I take bird pictures. That's my hobby. I'm a shitty golfer, so I don't want to do that anymore.
Well, David, I mean, this has been the most entertaining 2 hours that we've ever had. So I cannot thank you enough. If there's any other questions, scream now. But we really, really appreciate you taking the time, and I do want you to
Thanks
come
for
back.
hanging in here. I mean,
And I
I
do want you
probably
to
should have
come.
made the presentation a little smaller, but so
No,
on
perfect.
Friday, I'm giving the commencement address at the Humanities School at the University of Arizona, and there are going to be about 2,000 people there apparently.
Hmm.
And I've written
Wow.
it, and I don't normally like write like here. Obviously, I was just going off the top, but in this case, I wanted to write it, and it'll be, you know, because there's a time. I don't want it to be more than like 12, 13 minutes, something like that.
Wow.
Otherwise,
Yeah, even that's going to be a job for you, right? To narrow that
it's
down.
hard. I mean, I've spent a lot of time writing it because I want my stories to relate or experiences to have some value to them of kind of news you can
Career-wise.
use.
Yeah.
And like the Ford story, I'm going to abbreviated version of talking to him about, I said, unless you, and this came from my dad, if you don't ask, you don't get kind of thing. And like, here I am talking to the president of the United States, and I'm willing not to do that job. And that's that's one message for them. You have to be willing not to do something rather than to compromise your values. And that was a good example of that one. That a lot of people say, oh my God, I'll do anything to get that. Don't ever say you'll do anything to do anything, you know. And
Good poker player.
And my dad was a good example as a traveling salesman, but why, like I said earlier, watching, what I realized is he was selling himself first, and so people would, you know, engage and then would be interested in what he had to say. And I've taken a lot of that in my own career, and it's paid off. And the Robert Kennedy thing also, that the kindness that Bill Epridge showed me made a huge difference in my career. I mean, it was one person's act. It's like having good teachers. I have my youngest son, graduated from UC Berkeley with honors, and that's a really tough school. But one of the signal moments for him was deciding to take Mandarin as a freshman in high school. And the teacher was inspirational. And he's now a PhD Chinese literature scholar at University of Chicago because of her.
Right. Yeah.
And I mean, you could trace this back. I mean, contact tracing for things that paid off or not. But, and it's why, I mean, it made a huge difference in how I deal with people. The whole business in the White House was a partially Bill Epridge's fault, you know, that I want to help other people out.
Yeah.
That no picture was worth so much, like to cost someone a life or any of that. I've never felt like that. I mean, it's not a cutthroat profession, even though it sounds that way. I think most photographers are very empathetic and compassionate.
Yeah, and I have to say, when you told that little story of allowing the other photographers in, and you being in Cincinnati and letting that photographer come in and get a shot, you know, it's giving it back. I mean, it's great. I mean,
yeah, I didn't. I mean, that was too early to be giving it back, but I know that that's the big thing. People talk about paying it forward and blah, blah, blah. I mean, you just have all these little buzz sayings. But I think in your heart, you want other people to carry on where you've left off, right, or in the middle of while you're doing it. And that's another thing that I tell the students is that that hopefully there are people out there in this crowd that are going to want to document history the way I did. And it's not all journalism. I mean, this has got the whole class of you know, everything from Arabic to Judaic studies to geography and history. And I said, but everybody can really chronicle. And I said, one of the things that I recommend is people making notes. And maybe I think if you call it journaling, I don't know if that's what I would call it, but that we all see history every day in through our own eyes, and that we've kind of lost writing skills, like where people would write about their experiences right up until we got like email and stuff. And now it's like a quick little note and, oh, should I put this? But these heartfelt letters from women and men, you know, like that's how Ken Burns made a whole the Civil War series out of words from the past, but we don't do it that way anymore. And we write all this shit on, you know, Twitter and Facebook, and like, I do it. I mean, I'm guilty. But if you take a little more time with it, I think that's a contribution to our world. And of course, take pictures.
Right. Yeah, that's absolutely true. Well, David, I thank you so much for doing this. When the books are coming out, you have to come back and share with us. We would love to do that.
Have longer gray beards and gray hair at that point, or no hair.
Yeah. Well,
it's a challenge. It's a challenge. I mean, it's exciting for me, really.
Good.
To do it. And somebody asked me at Mizzou, like, it's a question that nobody'd ever asked, which I thought it's always provocative and interesting to hear something like that. And she said, what makes you so good? And I really didn't, I know I'm good. I mean, I'm good. Otherwise people wouldn't pay me to do it. But I don't think of myself that way. And so it was kind of a weird question. But then I had to answer the question. It really boiled down to my curiosity, my enthusiasm, my determination. I don't quit when I'm on something. I'd rather be somewhere a day early than an hour late. I mean, there are a lot of things that you pick up in kindergarten, a good book written about that. And then I still kind of have the mind of an 18-year-old. I'm still excited about what I do. I've never lost my basic enthusiasm for it and the value of doing it. And we were talking about Vietnam being the first television war.
Right.
And what I've always thought was that if TV brought the war to your living room, it was the still photograph that took it right to your heart. And so we remember things in split seconds. The Michelle Obama picture, Michelle Obama hugging George Bush, you might have missed that on TV if there hadn't been a still photo like that. Because if you saw how fast that happened, so now you can think about it, it gives you a chance to study a moment, even though the moment may not accurately represent something. That's certainly possible. It happens all the time. That the story tells a picture. No, a lot of times it tells the wrong story, or the picture tells the wrong story. So, but every now and then you nail it. Ali did go down in the 15th round, and
That's
I
my
caught
favorite.
him
I love
there.
that.
And if you blinked, you would have missed it. Well, a whole bunch of photographers blinked.
Yeah.
But whether it was me or someone else, I'm glad the picture was taken, because then you saw something it's visceral, it's there. And that's what's in your head. Those moments, Eddie Adams' picture is in your head forever. If you all you have to do is see it once. Joe Rosenthal's flag raising picture, Nick Witt's little girl running down the road. Yeah. Those pictures are there for the duration. And that's a real responsibility.
I asked this question with a little trepidation, but I'm going to go. David, if you could represent his career in one single photograph, which one would it be?
For me?
Yes.
This is where I'm really lucky to not be Eddie Adams, Joe Rosenthal, or Nick Witt, because and I'll use Joe as an example.
Right.
And I'm not trying to avoid it because I don't have the answer for you.
All right, you heard that, Hank, right?
But Joe, who I gave the eulogy at Joe's funeral. Joe was, way older than me, but he and I became very good friends. The sweetest guy on the earth, and modest guy. And I did a story on Joe for, I think it was like World War II magazine, and I was able to go back and find all these pictures that he took, and he's remembered for the one. I think the good news for me is I'm not remembered for one photograph, because that tends to define your life. It drove Eddie nuts, and it didn't drive Joe nuts. He was a little more sanguine about it, but he referred to it. Nick Good was just happy to have taken the shot. I mean, Nick and I are very close friends. We're the two last surviving Pulitzer winners from the Vietnam War. And we see each other all the time. He lives down in Orange County. And Peter Arnett is the third. Everybody else is gone. I mean, you could say that Frances Fitzgerald conceivably, but she won for this book. She was in Vietnam. But I'm mainly talking about the journalism award winners. Frances is definitely the Pulitzer winner for Vietnam War, but I'm not remembered for one photo. In a way, it's like, I mean, not that I wouldn't have loved to have made a picture like that. That's not what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I've thought about it, and because those three people were so close to me. And Joe and Eddie was a love-hate relationship, because that was his relationship with the world. But certainly Nick, one of the sweetest people around, and Joe also. But their career, their obit is going to be, they're the ones that took that photo. Right. My obit won't be that way if there may never be an obit for me. I don't know. I think I can go for another 100 years.
Well,
but you know what I mean. So it was
you're 100% right. That's a great answer. Yeah. Just so you know, Frank Schramm has said it's your Spiro Agnew shot in the limo.
No.
That's what he says.
But
But
it's a good one, Frank, if you're listening. It's a good one. Yeah, I was the only one. The pictures are way better if you're the only one that got them. That's for sure. One thing, somebody said, what's the best thing about having exclusive access? I said, well, if you miss a shot, no one will ever know. So, it's not
There
like
you
being
go.
out there with like 15 other photographers and you get gunned down, you know. So yeah,
Right.
I've been on both ends of that one. But
Yeah.
yeah, that's a good one. But Agnew, well, it doesn't rise. A lot of that would have to do like, what's the importance of the event? It was important because of Spiro Agnew, I became the president's photographer. But Spiro Agnew had nothing to do with me winning a Pulitzer Prize in Vietnam. That had happened, but that helped put me in a position to take the picture of Agnew. So you can spend all day like,
Yeah.
you know,
Connecting
like
the dots.
reading through that stuff. And all right, everybody. Well, we have a Christine. Do you have a question?
She was sending you a kiss.
Oh, thanks.
She's muted. She doesn't.
Will
You
we
can
be
unmute
able to get a
yourself.
copy of this recording so that we
Yes,
can share it?
Yes, if you go
But if
to
you need to like put yourself to sleep, that would be perfect. So,
if you
Oh,
go
stop.
if you go to Projections NYC on YouTube, it'll be there. You have to subscribe. Everyone should subscribe, but it'll be there probably the end of the week, early next week.
Okay, thank
It'll
you.
be up.
the
Thanks.
one
David.
person I
you,
know
Mr.
will not be
Kennerly.
watching this. The one person I know that won't watch this is going to be me. I hate seeing myself like, doing this.
We all
stuff.
do. That's why we're behind the camera all the time.
Yeah,
Oh
there you
yeah,
go.
no, for sure. All right,
David.
everybody, I
you.
gotta go.
Thanks,
David,
David.
thank you very much.
Frank, thank you so much. That was a fun evening.
Thank you very much.
I should shout out to people. One question I didn't ask was, what am I using for cameras now? Canon, I'm a Canon user. They pay me to say that, but not really, because you couldn't pay me enough to say something like that. But I'm using the new R5 mirrorless cameras with their RF lenses, which are incredible. And I also know the other cameras are good. I'm not like being negative, but boy, it's so much fun shooting with those things. But it still boils down to the eye behind the camera, even if it's a box brownie. So, all right, everybody, good night.
Good night. Thanks, David. Thanks
Night.
again
Night,
for
thank
coming.
so much.
And everyone have great, safe holidays. So we really appreciate it. You know, just thanks very much. And we've had a great year, even though it's been another pandemic year. But we're going to have a great list of presenters in the coming year. And if any of you guys are interested in presenting, we'd love to have you. Everyone gets to present who wants to present. Okay, so
Frank, Merry Christmas, and thank you for doing this for all of us. This is
Oh.
Tony Lovejoy. Thank you.
Tony, thanks, Tony, and yeah, your question was great. Yeah, we appreciate you guys all coming in and spread the word, and we'll see you after.